Hi there, this is RMPS National 5 revision lesson looking at the unit of Islam. Now during this lesson I'm going to go through a number of different topics within the unit of Islam, give you some information and also give you opportunity to answer some past paper style questions and then get some feedback and see how you've done. So a bit of background information firstly on the religion of Islam. Of course, Islam is a worldwide religion. It's spread across the world. Today there's about 1.5 billion Muslims around the world. Muslims consider some of their holy places to be places like Medina, Mecca, of course, which we'll come to later, Jerusalem, and others. There are many mosques around the world in different countries, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Morocco, indeed the UK, and plenty of Western countries as well, where Islam has spread. Muslims follow the 5 pillars of Islam as some of the central tenets of their faith. We're going to look at those in a bit more detail later. Muslims around the world go on pilgrimage to Hajj to Mecca at least once in their lifetime, and they follow the Quran, which is the holy book of Islam. So let's go into a bit more detail of what is included in the Islam unit at National 5 level. These are some of the topics you'll have already covered. We've looked at nature of God, which is what Muslims believe about Allah. We've looked at Khalifas, the responsibility that Allah gives all people to look after His creation. We looked at the idea of free will in Islam, Allah creating human beings with this opportunity, this choice to obey Him or not. We thought about sin, which involves everything that is disobedient, is considered disobeying Allah. The Prophet Muhammad, of course, is Allah's final messenger, considered by Muslims to be the greatest of the prophets. And the Quran, the Islamic holy book, which was revealed to Allah, to Muhammad, Allah's words revealed to Muhammad. Then we've also looked at judgment, and this idea the Muslims believe that Allah is going to bring a final day of judgment on humanity in the final days. We looked at Jannah and Jahannam, which is Muslims' belief in the afterlife in heaven and hell. The 5 pillars, of course, which we've just thought about. The 5 pillars commands all Muslims that they must obey. Living according to the Quran today, thinking about how modern Muslims practice their faith and the Muslim practices of worship. So that's the whole unit and all the different topics within the unit. We're not going to go through all of those in this revision lesson. We're going to look particularly at the topics of sin, the Prophet Muhammad, judgment, Jannah and Jahannam, the 5 pillars, and living according to the Quran. So firstly, let's have a look at the topic of sin in Islam. What Muslims believe about sin? Well, Muslims believe, for one, that we are all born innocent. We're all born sinless. That Allah creates us as innocent people. This belief is called fitra in Arabic. And Muslims believe that we have been given free will by Allah. And therefore, if we have free will, if we're innocent, choosing to disobey Allah is a choice that we make. We're not born that way. We choose whether to obey Him or not, and therefore disobeying Him, sin, is a choice that we make. The most serious sin in Islam is shirk, which is worshipping anyone or anything in the place of Allah. Muslims believe strongly that Allah does not share His power or His divinity with anyone else. So they certainly would not believe in polytheism, which is the worship of multiple different gods. They believe in one God, which is the God Allah. And they don't believe that Allah shares His power with anyone else. He is alone God and alone all-powerful. Minor sins in Islam are forgiven if a person repents. However, that sin of shirk that we mentioned previously is an unforgivable sin. Other sins, such as stealing, such as lying, such as cheating, these sins can be forgiven by Allah. The sin of shirk is unforgivable. On the day of judgment, Allah will weigh up our good deeds and our bad deeds, and He'll punish those individuals whose evil deeds are way more than their good deeds. They will be punished for their sin. Islam teaches that God is merciful, that Allah is merciful, that individuals can be forgiven if they repent, if they choose to say sorry to Allah, to ask for forgiveness. He is merciful and will forgive them. However, if there's no repentance, an individual will be sentenced to Jahannam, which is hell, in the afterlife. When they are judged by Allah, He will judge them to be sentenced to hell. So there's a bit of information about what Muslims believe about sin. You can go back and look at the lesson we covered on sin in Islam if you want a bit more information. But if you feel ready, how about tackling this question? I've given you a 4-marker question. Why might Muslims' belief about sin encourage them to be obedient to Allah? So if you pause the video now, have a go at that question, and then come back, press play, and I'll give you some suggested answers of how you'd answer that. See if you have picked up some of those answers already. If you've not, you can add them to your own answer. Okay, so maybe you've had a go at that question. Why might Muslim belief about sin encourage them to be obedient to Allah? Well, one way you can answer that question, this might be one of your marks, it's a 4-marker. So one mark might be Muslims believe that the Quran contains the instructions of Allah about how to live. They read and memorize the Quran in order to ensure that they are obedient to Him. For example, they'll be caring and compassionate towards others and look after the environment. So Muslims believe that in order to avoid sin, they've got to read the Quran, be aware of the instructions of Allah, and learn to live their lives according to it. Another mark you might get from something like this answer: Muslims believe that Allah will judge all humankind in the final days by weighing up their good deeds and their bad deeds. This belief might encourage Muslims to carefully obey Allah, being aware that He sees their actions at all times and will judge them. So they are accountable for what they do in this life. So they make sure that they honour Allah and follow His will, being aware that they will be judged for it. Another mark you might get from something along the lines of Muslims believe that depending on Allah's judgment, everyone will be sent to heaven, al-Jannah, or hell, al-Jahannam, believing that there will be a reward for obedience and a punishment for disobedience, and therefore that might make Muslims fearful to disobey Allah and instead look for that reward through their obedience. Another mark you might get from something like Muslims believe Allah is merciful and forgiving, and He will forgive them of minor sins if they repent. This would encourage Muslims to obey Allah, as He is a good and fair judge who can forgive them even if they make mistakes. Muslims believe that shirk, the unforgivable sin, worshipping anything or anyone in the place of Allah, is the most serious and unforgivable sin. They would never accept any other god or religion, but only worship Allah as one God. Okay, so there's a few different ways you could answer that question on Muslim belief about sin. And maybe you want to add some of those points to your answer so that maybe you remember them if a similar question comes up. But let's move on. The next part of the unit we're going to look at is the topics of judgment, the final day of judgment, and Jannah and Jahannam. So this is really a lesson about topics about Islam and the afterlife. So you can go back if you want and look at that lesson 11 in our Google Classroom, and have a look at some of the information there about what Muslims believe about that final day of judgment and the afterlife. But here's just a few pointers, particularly about Al-Jannah and Al-Jahannam, the Muslim belief in heaven and hell. Al-Jannah is often thought of this garden paradise that Muslims believe that if we obey Allah, if we are found to our good deeds to be greater than our evil deeds in our life on that day of judgment, then Allah will will give us this reward of being in Al-Jannah, this garden paradise. It's where those who are faithful to Allah will be rewarded after they die, a place of contentment, of peace forever, without suffering, without pain. And really, Muslims believe that it will contain everything you could possibly want in this world. It's given to them as a reward by Allah for being faithful to Him. On the other hand, Jahannam, which is the Muslim idea of hell, is a place of fire and torture, a place where those who have lived lives, evil lives perhaps, or just simply been lives that have rejected Allah as the one God, who've committed that unforgivable sin, shirk, is a place that they will be sent on Judgment Day. And the Quran contains some pretty awful pictures of Jahannam. I'm sure you're aware of things like people being chained up, given boiling water and pus to drink. And so the punishments there are carried out in accordance, ideas, with the degree of sin that someone has committed during their life. So it's a form of justice in that sense, that Allah is handing out justice to people for their failure to obey Him in their lives. So if you've maybe gone back and had a look at that lesson on the afterlife and had a thought about some of those, have a go at pausing the video now again and have a go at answering this question. What do Muslims believe about the afterlife? And it's a 4-marker. It's trying to think of 4 points and 4 explanations. What do Muslims believe about the afterlife? Okay, so if you've had a go at that, let's see if we can get some marks. So maybe you've answered some of these points. If not, you can add them to your own answer. Muslims believe that there will be a day of judgment when Allah judges all people. Each person's good deeds and bad deeds will be weighed on scales. Depending on the results, they'll be sent to heaven or hell. Another mark might be got from something along the lines of Muslims believe heaven, Jannah, is a paradise garden. Those who go there experience eternal peace and are rewarded for lives lived in obedience to Allah. Of course, Muslims also believe that we have an eternal soul. When we die, our soul goes firstly to a place of waiting called Barzakh. And in Barzakh, the individual is asked questions by 2 angels to test their faith in Allah. Depending on the answers given, the soul will either rest or be tormented until the Day of Judgment. Muslims believe they get to paradise, Jannah, by living religiously, by asking Allah for forgiveness when they sin, and showing good actions in their lives. Therefore, obeying the rules set out by Allah is of ultimate importance to them. On the other hand, other than heaven, the Muslims believe in hell, Jahannam, a place of fire and torment. Those who go there will experience suffering, a punishment for their evil deeds on earth, and rejection of Allah as the one and only God. Okay, so that's the topics of judgment and Jannah and Jahannam. We'll move on again. The next topic we'll look at is the Prophet Muhammad and his life. So you'll find that lesson in the Google Drive. You can have a look at that. Lesson number 5, the life of the Prophet Muhammad. And of course, we mapped out his life in a timeline, looking at his birth, some of the key moments in his life, when he was made an orphan, his parents died, when he became a merchant, and he worked for his aunt as a merchant, later then being married to her, and becoming a very successful merchant in the area. That led on to Muhammad's revelation of the Quran, where he received the words of Allah through that dream, that vision he experienced in the cave of Hira. And of course, having received the message of the Quran, he went on to be a prophet, telling people about the words of God, of Allah, going and spreading that message of the Quran. The people of Mecca, where he lived and worked at the time, didn't like his message of this being one God. They seemed to worship lots of different gods or had different ideas of divinity. And so they rejected his message eventually and sent him away from Mecca. And he travelled with the followers that did listen to him to Medina, where he set up a new city, a place where people worshipped Allah. They followed Muhammad, the Prophet. And after a while, he became more and more popular. His message of the Quran, of Allah, the one and true God, was followed by many, many people, including Jews, including Arabs of the area, converted to Islam. And he left Medina after a number of wars with Mecca and arrived back in Mecca, this time in order to take it over as a conqueror in order to bring it into his growing Islamic nation. And we're told in the Quran that it was a bloodless victory, that Muhammad took over as a peaceful conqueror of Mecca. And then not long after, in 633, having spread the message of the Quran, having grown this Islamic nation, included Medina, included Mecca, included other cities and areas around the Arab region, Muhammad died, and his words in the Quran were passed on through his followers. So there's a little bit about the life of Muhammad. You can go back, as I say, and look at lesson number 5 and get a bit more detail. But if you've done so, how about attempting this question? Why is the Prophet Muhammad important to Muslims today? So we want to think about some of the events of his life, why Muslims consider them important, some of the things he did, some of the ways that they think he is admirable, and think about why he is important to Muslims today. If you pause it now, have a go at that question, then I'll give you some suggested answers. Okay, so if you've attempted that question, here are some suggested answers. Muslims believe Muhammad was the seal of the prophets, which means that he was the last and greatest of the messengers of Allah. They believe that the Prophet Muhammad was the final prophet. That's what the seal of the prophets means, that he seals up the words of Allah in the Quran, that it cannot be added to or changed. And they believe that Muhammad is the greatest prophet of all the prophets who brought the words of Allah. Another answer you might get marked for would be Muhammad is seen as the best example of a faithful Muslim. Muslims today admire characteristics Muhammad showed, such as honesty, integrity, compassion, and just his continued obedience to Allah and his word. The teachings of Muhammad are kept by Muslims all over the world today, as they believe they are the words of Allah and they should be carefully obeyed. The teachings of Muhammad found in the Quran, Muslims revere, follow today, and they carefully obey them. Muhammad was a great spiritual example to all Muslims, as he was always searching for his own spiritual peace and understanding. They see him as an ideal man who constantly is trying to better himself, become more closer to Allah, to understand him, and to practice faithfulness and obedience to Allah. And that's something Muslims admire, this excellent example of being a Muslim. It was his mission to spread the word of Islam, and this is an example to all Muslims that they follow. So Muhammad, of course, was the most successful in many ways at spreading the Islamic message, the Islamic faith, and Muslims today seek to continue to spread that message, to see others converted to Islam. Muhammad was against violence, wanted peace, which is very relevant today due to the wars and human rights abuses. He looked after the poor, the needy, which inspires many Muslims to do acts of kindness and charity work. So Muslims today give money, for example, to charities. One of the 5 pillars, zakat, to give money, was a teaching of Muhammad. They see his attitudes of kindness, of fairness, of justice as important to follow today in looking after the poor and needy. Okay, so that was the Prophet Muhammad. We'll move on finally to our last couple of topics, the 5 pillars of Islam and living according to the Quran, which are tied together because the 5 pillars, of course, are the 5 rules that all Muslims try to obey today, living in faithfulness to Allah's words in the Quran. So you want to have a look back at lesson number 10. You can have a little look at the 5 pillars of Islam. But we'll go through some of them just here. So the first pillar of Islam is the Shahada. The Shahada is that statement of faith that Muslims make when they are converted, when they are making a profession of their faith. They say there's no God but Allah and Muhammad is his messenger. It's a statement they say 3 times in front of witnesses in order to become a Muslim. Salah is the next pillar, which is a ritual prayer of Islam, which all Muslims conform to the will of Allah. So they pray this prayer 5 times a day, facing Mecca, and it is a way of showing their submission, their love of Allah, their obedience to Allah, that they pray this way. Often praying on a mat, again, facing Mecca, the holy city. Zakat. Zakat is a giving of money to charity. It's a way that Muslims show their thankfulness to Allah for the money they've given him. He's given them, and they give their money to people who are less fortunate than themselves, the poor and the needy. So zakat is another one of the 5 pillars. Then Sam. Sam is the pillar that means to fast. And Muslims fast at all different times of the year, but particularly in the 9th month of the Islamic calendar, which is the month of Ramadan. And during that month, they will fast all through the daylight hours from food and water. And then during the evening, when the sun goes down, they're allowed to eat and drink together. So they often do that before bedtime. Sam is if you have any medical reasons, exemptions, or perhaps you're pregnant or you have a dietary need. Muslims are not required to fast during Ramadan, but it's encouraged because it's a way of showing your submission, your love of Allah. And during those times of fasting, you might do special times of prayer and be just focused on being thankful to Allah for the things He's given them. Finally, Hajj. Hajj is one of the 5 pillars, which is a pilgrimage to the holy city of Mecca in Saudi Arabia, which every adult Muslim must make at least once in their lifetime. And we've covered that in that lesson. Okay, so if you've had a look at the lesson, if you're ready, you can attempt this question. Describe how Muslims practice one of the 5 pillars, and give me 4 marks for that answer. So choose one of the 5 pillars and describe how Muslims practice it. Okay, so if you've had a go at that that question, let's see some of the suggested answers. Describe how Muslims practice one of the 5 pillars. Well, the Shahada might be one example of that. Is a profession of faith someone makes when they become a Muslim believer. It involves saying the words, "There's no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger." The individual must say these words 3 times in front of witnesses. After this, they are accepted as a Muslim and welcomed into the community. How about Salah? One of the 5 pillars is Salah, which means to pray. Muslims are expected to pray 5 times a day. When they pray, they use a prayer mat pointing in the direction of Mecca, and they bow down on this mat to show their dedication and their submission to Allah, reciting a prayer in Arabic. To begin the act of prayer, they say Allahu Akbar, which means God is great. Another one might be Zakat. One of the 5 pillars, Zakat. This is an act of charity, giving money to the poor and needy. Zakat is seen as an act of obedience to Allah, as the Quran encourages giving gifts to the poor and looking after orphans and widows. There are many Muslim charities today that are funded by Zakat. One of the 5 pillars is Sam, which means to fast. Muslims fast many times throughout the year. The most important fast is Ramadan. This takes place during the 9th month of the Islamic calendar and involves fasting from food and drink during daylight hours. Fasting is considered an act of obedience to Allah and helps a believer think about the good things that Allah has given them. And finally, Hajj. Hajj is a religious pilgrimage which all Muslims are expected to attempt once in their lifetime if able. The pilgrimage is to the holy city of Mecca in Saudi Arabia, and when the pilgrims arrive in Mecca, they make their way towards the Kaaba, an ancient shrine believed to be claimed by Muhammad in the name of Allah. Pilgrims walk around this shrine 7 times in an anti-clockwise direction while repeating prayers in Arabic. So there you go. I hope you have managed, or I hope that's helped you get through some of those questions in your revision. I'm sure you'll all do really, really well when the prelim comes and when the exam comes, if you're using this revision video to help you with that. And yeah, good luck. I'm sure give it your best shot, and just trust that the revision you've done will be really helpful to you. Just a reminder, before you go into the prelim, just make sure you know where you're sitting. Make sure you know the time. Some of you might have additional support that you'll be getting, and you may have extra time. So be aware of that and be aware of where you need to be. So you turn up at least 15 minutes before the beginning of the prelim test. look forward to seeing you all back in class and hearing how you did. I'm sure you do great. Thanks. Bye now.